Hey Simon, how you doing?
Not bad, not bad.
We'll just give Bill a few seconds to get on board as well. Where are you calling from today, Simon?
I'm on the Gold Coast in Australia, so it's about 8 p.m. here.
Oh, neat, neat. I'm in Auckland, a little bit further east of you. It's about 10 p.m. here.
It must be freezing.
Oh, especially I just been got back from Berlin, which I believe Bill, were you still in Berlin?
No, I'm back in Switzerland now.
And I was a lot warmer there than it was here.
Yeah, it looks like I might be heading to Paris for ETH conference in maybe 2 weeks or so. So I look forward to getting out there and getting to the warmth.
Yeah, no, awesome. Well, should we get started? We record this anyway, so we can share this later with those that don't join in time. But anyway, let's kick off. Welcome to, I think it's our fourth episode of the SubQuery sessions. And today I'm very lucky to be joined by two excellent people to talk about education Web3. Today I've got Bill Laboon, who is the head of ecosystem and grants at the Web3 Foundation, and Simon Chadwick, the head of Loop Learn. This is interesting because we've got two people from two different ecosystems, but both doing the same style of thing or the same area of focus. And it's going to be really interesting hearing from you two both about how we're approaching that in different ecosystems. So maybe I'll give you guys both a chance to introduce yourself, a little bit about kind of where you work in, and we'll go from there. I'll start with you, Bill.
Sure. So yeah, thanks for having me, James, and I guess the rest of SubQuery. My name is Bill Laboon. I'm head of education and grants at Web3 Foundation. So our team's goal is to help grow the Polkadot ecosystem. Specifically, what we work on is a variety of educational initiatives, classes, talks, things like this, outreach, as well as providing grants to those who are looking to build their own projects on Polkadot.
And Simon, take us away.
Awesome. Just question: is there going to be a battle to the death afterwards between the ecosystems? No, I'm just joking. I'm Simon from Loop Learn, which is part of Loop Finance, a DeFi ecosystem. And it's interesting enough, Loop Learn actually started on Terra, which is quite interesting because it's basically mean that we've had to pivot recently and lost a lot of our content with the Terra crash because it was very focused. But the idea when I first came around Loop and Loop Learn was to build a really solid education platform to help onboard newbies into DeFi and into crypto, and starting from the basics, going into onboarding, how to onboard, understanding different pieces of DeFi, how it works, and using analogies, but also using a lot of concepts and understanding of not just what crypto is, but why it exists and what are the things that it's trying to solve. And so I built Loop Learn and got funding. We basically got funded by TFL. So Terraform Labs actually funded about 15K per video. We had about there was about 200 videos just this year in the pipeline to make very high quality animated videos. And the idea was to build like an earn to learn platform that used NFTs to reward users for watching content, going through the videos, answering quizzes, and engaging with on-chain functions. So you might learn how to use Anchor Protocol or learn how to use a DEX, and then go and perform an action on the DEX, and it would check, and you get an NFT. Now that kind of got a little bit uprooted with the Terra stuff, but we're actually pivoting to Cosmos. So we're editing a lot of the videos and moving our stuff over there to help educate in crypto overall, but especially the Cosmos ecosystem and dApps and ecosystem. So yeah, that's Loop Learn.
I think we can save the battles of the ecosystem for later, for later on. But I want to start with something kind of like a really high level question, which is I'd like to learn from you both. What do you think is the biggest barrier to entry into crypto, into Web3, into blockchain? And how do you think we're going to solve that? Maybe we can
I
start.
guess,
Yeah, go for it.
yeah, so I guess I'll start. I mean, I think obviously I'm very biased, but I believe education in general really is a huge barrier. Um, I think that right now the paradigm of Web3 of blockchain usage is very different than the paradigm, right, of how Web 2 works. And I think there's a lot of confusion when I talk to people about just how blockchain works, right, and how to interact with it. And I think there people need to understand the foundations of it at least a little bit. And I think of it really as just like the move from the command line to a GUI. I'm old enough to remember this, and there are a lot of in the early days. I remember using just like a terminal with X and just a bunch of different text boxes, essentially, right, terminals floating around. And it took a while for like a real graphical user interface to be out there, and for people to start using it and understanding how to use it, instead of just as an extension of just the command line over and over again. And I think that's sort of the same problem here, is people need to understand. I mean, part of it is that teams that are building projects need to come up with sometimes a better UX. But I also think that educating people on the foundations, like how it works, is really important to understanding what you can do with it and how to interact with it, and having like a mental model of how this works compared to Web 2. I think just understanding that foundation is really important, and a really big barrier right now.
I'll say that I've changed my tune on this recently, and I think the question can be kind of split into two, because are we talking about users right now, or are we talking about mainstream adoption? They're two different things, right? And I can answer both of them from my perspective. I do believe education is very important, but I also do believe that part of the issue is actually bringing users into blockchain, or bringing users into crypto, when in reality, to actually successfully achieve the mission that crypto is trying to achieve, it actually has to be the opposite. It has to be bringing crypto and blockchain to the people, right? So I do think there will always still be a place for education around potentially self custody and education about what that means. But I think a few years down in years down the track, when blockchain has successfully achieved its mission, users won't need education to interact with blockchain, because it'll be just used in the background of things that they're used to using already, like the iPhone. Users often don't necessarily need education on how to use an iPhone. There may be some things that they do, but as an everyday use, we've kind of evolved into a place where we just use the iPhone, and we know how to kind of navigate the apps and everything like this. And we don't necessarily have to go through a video series or an onboarding series on how to use each individual piece. Now, there's always education out there. Older generations may need some education there. I do believe that's long term. I think for now, I think Bill was spot on in terms of educating the people that want to come into crypto about what are the different pieces of technology and the uses, and yeah, from that side, and how to use and how to onboard and how to do this stuff. But I think a lot of UX, as Bill said, needs to change as well around wallets, and the millions of steps and hoops that people need to jump through to obviously get into DeFi and crypto.
Yeah, so this is an interesting point, and you both touched on it, and it comes back to this. I was at Polkadot Decoded last week, which is an excellent conference, and brought together most of the Polkadot teams. I was in Berlin, but I heard a fantastic speech by some in the ecosystem, who mentioned that their perspective was that we didn't need to abstract away blockchain, and we shouldn't be trying as much to abstract away blockchain, but rather teaching people to understand the blockchain and how it works, and its idiosyncrasies. So it's kind of like these two competing viewpoints around, do we abstract that all away, or do we kind of try to bring everyone into that and allow them to understand how that works? What do you think it'll be one way or the other, or do you think there's a middle ground here?
I think from my personal standpoint, I think it would be almost maybe like a custom experience where, like, users seek simplicity, right? They seek shortcuts and simplicity. You go on an Uber Eats app and you press a button with as few steps as possible to get to your required goal, right? And I think getting people to come into an ecosystem and learn a whole new thing and interact with something that takes more steps potentially what they're used to, and different dApps and different things, I don't think is the way to mainstream adoption. I think there's going to be a lot of people that want a more custom experience potentially. But that's kind of where I see it at, but I could be wrong with it.
So in a way, like segment the expert users from kind of mainstream users and give both what they want and what they need. What about you, Bill? What's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I think it's going to be a combination. So I want to, Simon, you had mentioned, having a fight to the death about ecosystems after this, but I don't think we have to fight to the death. But I want to push back on something you said about using the iPhone, and even when we started using the iPhone, there were things people had to learn, right? Like coming from a traditional, like GUI experience, like Windows or OS X or whatever, things like swiping, right? Like basic sort of foundational concepts. You still had to learn them. I think that Web3 is not going to be entirely just something in the background where people can use exactly the same mental model. However, I think what we do need to do is make it easier for people to figure this stuff out without causing major problems if you mess up, right? People learn by trying things. But I'll be honest with you, it was probably like 5 years before I could submit a Bitcoin transaction without just sweating that I just totally messed something up.
I still sweat every time.
Yeah. But right now, if you mess up swiping on a phone, all right, no big deal. Right? And I think that's part of the thing, right, of educating. Professional education is one thing, but this sort of, I don't know if there's a word for it. I'm sure there's some fancy pedagogical term, but this self-education, right, of trying things out, not being worried if you mess it up, right? If you swipe and you realize swiping with 3 fingers doesn't work, you have to swipe with 1 finger, you figure it out. So same with blockchain, right? So I think part of it is there are different paradigms in the interface. I keep using that word. I feel like a businessman or something, like a different mental model, right, of how things work, having your own keys, keeping them protected. I think we'll see different ways of doing that, like with the Solana phone, for instance. But I think that these concepts still need to be learned. I think we just need to make it easier and less painful, for people to learn them. But I think so part of that is going to be like UX improvements, but part of it is just going to be, people learning and understanding it, as they use it and figuring out what it's good for.
So I guess in summary, right, you both have to teach the micro process, how to do X, how to do Y, what this particular thing means, but also you have to as well teach those macro concepts of how a blockchain works and operates at a macro level, and how that then relates as outcomes to certain things that happen and that you interact with, right?
Yeah, yes, but I think on that point again, there's still almost a gray area that I'm obviously with you in terms of splitting these groups up, but I think we're seeing this more and more. Why do sexes except for just marketing? Why do centralized exchanges get more user adoption typically than DeFi does in terms of mainstream users, right? Some of it is because for users, the self-custody narrative isn't necessarily strong enough in their minds as almost like a pain point or a need to jump through all the hoops that they need to jump through to get through into DeFi currently. So I'm still a believer that the majority of crypto in the future will almost be kind of like a fintech wrapper over these underlying things, where it's made a lot easier for users to set up wallets and to do all this sort of stuff, and that self-custody is something in the background that it's not necessarily their main focus, because for a lot of users, they simply don't care about that. Even though we care a lot about that in crypto, for users, until there's enough pain and there's a really strong reason for them to, I don't think that is necessarily at least a strong first driver. I think higher yields and all this sort of stuff maybe, but in terms of decentralization and the ability for users to have control of their own funds, I think as kind of a leader, I don't think that is the main leader necessarily.
Yeah, I'm not a psychologist, but to understand, or a marketing psychologist to understand what people want. But I think that when people see the problems that centralized exchanges have, when you see the lack of proof, when you see them lending out their money, I think that more and their funds and their assets, I think more and more you will see demand for it. So right now, you're right. I mean, I think that the demand is not there because besides a subset of people, they may not, like us, that really care about decentralization, that care about self-custody. Um, I think that other people don't understand the benefits, but I think, and hopefully not without much pain, but as that they'll see, like, right, the problems with this. And from the other end, I hope that people can make, like, developers can make better self-custodial, or at least like half custodial things, like Casa does, where you can have a multi-sig, right, or what, not to go too much on Polkadot, but like social recovery. So if you do lose your seed phrase, there are ways to recover it. So I think it's going to be in both directions, right? I really believe in the future there will be more of a push towards self-custody, to doing more things on chain. But I also think, like I said before, we need to make that easier for people, and more forgiving of mistakes. In order for them to sort of self-educate. And I think part of my job is not just to explain the how, here's how to do X, Y, and Z on this particular chain, but also the why. There are benefits to it, even if they're not always well explained, or they're not what people are looking for now. My personal belief is that more and more people will want this going forward.
So cycling back to education, right? So, both of you have a goal here of educating the next, let's say, billion people into this space. We're seeing a lot of, as you said before, Simon, like learn to earn platforms, a lot of video tutorials. Do we think that format's going to dominate going forward in the future? Do we believe that maybe we're going to have to do more old-fashioned education going into schools and universities? How are we going to educate the next billion users of crypto?
I think it's a mixture. I like incentives personally because I've come from kind of education in the past where it takes like skin in the game, or a strong interest for a user to stay engaged through a learning experience, right? And I think learn to earn and incentive mechanisms, if you structure them right, are a great way to kind of get people. Like, you're going to have some people that are going to jump on YouTube and they're going to like dig through, all the learning, and they're going to learn all about it. And there's a lot of users that aren't necessarily going to do that. And I think that extra push and a little bit of incentive, I think, can be quite powerful. Otherwise, there's obviously charging, like more blockchain courses in universities, as you said, schools, all this sort of stuff. I think there's a lot of ways to kind of like do it. I think I personally I like the incentive model. I think it kind of hooks people in, and it acts as a good hook. But I'm open to many different models of this.
Yeah, I mean, my background, I was a lecturer, before this, so I taught, but that's something that's very useful, but it's also not very scalable. It's not something that is going to get the next billion people, right? The next billion people are not going to, you sit through a semester-long university undergraduate course in blockchain technology. But what we still do that, actually. So we still work a lot of these more formalized courses, because remember I said it's sort of a two-pronged approach. Is one, you're educating, you want people to users to educate themselves, but you also want to have people that are developing to educate and make it easier for people. So the more developers we can bring on, right, the more ideas we can get, and those are going to be the people who, like Simon said, are going to watch every single YouTube video. But we also are like trying to make it easier for people to learn things on their own, to provide very bite-sized videos, and courses, small things, tutorials, things like that. So I think it's really something we need a variety of ways, right? Approaching developers, getting people to build on Polkadot or on any blockchain ecosystem. You need one approach, and that's going to help you get those billion people sort of indirectly, but also reaching out directly to those billion people in a variety of different ways. So one thing is learn to earn, but hopefully what we can do is provide an ecosystem that people want to be a part of, for other reasons, and because they want to be a part of it, that they'll learn, right? Nobody was paying there was no learn to earn for using OSX, right? But people started using it. They saw that it was useful. They wanted to learn more about it, and an entire ecosystem of books and classes, et cetera, sprung up around it. Same with different programming languages, et cetera. So I think learn to earn is something that is not quite unique to Web3, but something that's big there. But I think if we can allow people to have access to something that benefits them, like we can also teach them, and they'll want to learn about it.
The benefit speaks for itself. But okay, so if we narrow this down a little bit, and rather than say the next billion people, we say just let's get 1,000 of the best developers, the highest growth developers out there in the world to come into blockchain instead of going to a traditional software company, and maybe not just developers, but the smartest 1,000 people to come and work in blockchain.
Oh, they're already on
Because
Cosmos.
well, work in Cosmos, work in
Okay.
Polkadot, But how do we focus on those 1,000 people? I guess a lot of them will be developers. It's current state of the ecosystem, but also marketing, BD, sales. How do we go and attract those people to go into blockchain? Because I'll go on a limb here and say that potentially blockchain has a bit of a image problem, right? People for some reasons or another might associate it with some scams, with a lot of crazy art projects out there that make a lot of money and get rug pulled soon after. How do we kind of get those smarter 1,000 people into the space?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is teaching people that there are actually what are these actual use cases and how do they work, and just again, there are so many misconceptions about blockchain out there amongst the people that are not into this space. Like I have talked to numerous people, numerous in the last week, so that were like, well, why would I ever use blockchain? It uses up so much electricity, right? Because they think our Bitcoin equals blockchain. Um, so I think part of this is there's a lot of outreach. We try at Web3. I give a lot of talks to different organizations, to a lot of decision makers, trying to explain not just Polkadot, but what is blockchain, what are the benefits, and also I think being honest, what are the drawbacks, right? There's certain blockchain is not a panacea. It's not magical fairy dust that makes everything better. It's just a technology that allows certain things. And so to get more people into it, I think we really do need to be reaching out to these people and being open to criticism and explaining it. I know oftentimes my first instinct is just not to engage with someone who is just doing like obvious FUD, but people look at that, and if these things are not approached and argued against, then others just aren't willing to join. People need to understand like the truth, right? That sounds maybe a little bit self-aggrandizing, but they need to understand what actually blockchain is before they can make a good decision on it. And I think a lot of people, a lot of these smart teams, a lot of these smart developers, these 1,000 smartest, like you said, when they hear about this and realize that blockchain perhaps is not what they read about in the Economist or the Financial Times, and actually it's not just a bunch of scams, then they are much more open to then developing on top of it.
Yeah, I think again it comes down to painting vision and why, a lot of it, right? Same when I built Loop Learn and the education, a lot of it wasn't like, well, what is blockchain? It was more like, what is the vision and what is the potential applications of this to revolutionize specific industries or the future, and what's potentially a practical application of a smart contract in, you know, revolutionizing insurance, for example, and how can it make a better model, right? Like at its highest version, what is the power of this technology? Not necessarily what it is right now, understanding that it is early adopter phase and technology does use like the internet in the 90s, the internet in its early days was not what it is right now. And it didn't have the same applications as it does right now, right? So you know, crypto and blockchain has some very strong power. And as Bill said, it's about educating the potential of that technology as opposed to necessarily what is right now. I think in instructing these devs as well, there's a lot of like theoretical and kind of application education that is required in terms of like educating, bringing them in hands on, It might be an ecosystem that's got kind of a more handheld approach around, bringing devs in and teaching them, maybe a different coding language or smart contracts and how to code smart contracts. Maybe even an incubator of like programs and kind of hackathons and training sessions and all sorts of stuff that's needed to take, devs from where they are now into crypto. I'm not so much on the dev side, so I can't speak too much into that. But I do think like theory and practice is important, and then having the support in there as well is key. Yeah.
So I'm kind of curious, Simon. At the start, you mentioned that obviously Loop Finance was huge on Terra. It was one of the biggest projects on Terra, and you are looking at moving into the Cosmos ecosystem. I'm curious to know what the difference between the two in your experience has been, right? As someone that's kind of worked across both or been involved with both ecosystems, what have you found over the last few months?
It's been quite interesting, actually. The shift, like we're moving over to Juno, and we're actually going to go kind of multi-chain in general, but we're moving over to Juno, and that's been really interesting because we've kind of adopted an ecosystem where the community is quite strong. I think there's like some of the proposals got up to 95% vote participation. It's like really crazy in terms of like how political and engaged they are. I think it's kind of interesting. Like honestly, like looking back at Terra, we used to say it was a bit like a toxic relationship. Um, Terra had like a really strong kind of iron grip on controlling their ecosystem in terms of like there was a lot of potential favoritism and there was a lot of like things behind the scenes that a lot of people didn't see in terms of like it was all about control and it was all about um, really, obviously there was a vision and there was, the very, very strong vision that was leading kind of the charge, but there was also this iron grip on the way that things were done and who was let in where and what was happening. And we've come to Cosmos, it's been very different in terms of like, obviously there isn't a money printer out of thin air anymore, but the way that things kind of work seem to be a lot more community centered and community focused from the ground up rather than, one person that's kind of controlling a whole entire team and calling the shots and saying how it is. So it is quite interesting. I think Cosmos does have its UX issues as well, and I think that is something that going to help change around. Like they've got some really cool developers really building some really cool tools and some insane technologies, but they just don't know how to market and they don't know how to kind of bring that out of just a dev in his bedroom working really really hard on stuff. I'm not saying this is everyone in Cosmos, but I'm seeing some really cool projects that are kind of still small scale, and the next level of adoption is, bringing more funding in and VCs and marketing and that ability to kind of expand outside of just Cosmos. And I think when that happens, it's going to be extremely exciting.
So, taking a step back, right here we have two people, one educator working for an ecosystem team, and one educator working for the kind of the main foundation of an ecosystem. So what is the responsibilities of the teams themselves, like for example Loop, versus like the main foundation, in this case Web3 Foundation, and how do you think that needs to be split over time as we go forward, especially as like the child ecosystems or the child teams within this ecosystem grow bigger and bigger?
Yeah, so I'll take how I've seen the sort of like evolution of education for us. So I joined Web3 well before Polkadot launched back in early 2019, and first what I saw was we needed to teach builders, right, and we needed to teach people fundamentals. So a lot of my early classes, talks, workshops were about like foundational aspects, right? Even like a whole blockchain fundamentals course, which barely mentioned Polkadot itself, but more about how do blockchains work, how do hashes work, how does public key cryptography work, etc. And as we've gone on, as teams have come up, one thing, and as we've had more users, something that I've seen that we've had to do is develop more like focused how to. Right, we've become much more concrete as we've come along on what we're teaching. We also have had to sort of set boundaries a bit about what we're teaching. So, for instance, we did a lot of discussion in the very early days of like what parachains were capable of and what they were doing. And now we really leave that to the individual parachain teams. A lot are big enough to have their own educational and developer relations teams. So we are still a bit more, we really focus on the relay chain, the central chain, and things that can happen there, and how to build your own parachains, how to build projects on top of that. But we've definitely had a lot more uh, focus, I guess, on what we can produce and what we should be producing, as other educators have come into the ecosystem.
Yeah, mine's maybe a bit different. So to put it in perspective, like I think Loop Learn, we basically started building videos I think in January, maybe December, January, and for a while it was pretty much a one-man band. I had a couple devs and things, but I built out. I had an animation company as well, but built out 34 videos, rebuilt a whole LMS, and translated it into multiple languages, and that all happened within maybe 2 to 3 months. So that was a pretty strong grind in terms of getting that done. And then what was happening was that we kind of the idea was to build like a kind of a main flow, like a kind of a basic main flow, and then we were getting all the ecosystem projects in Terra to build videos, and I kind of had a bit of a pipeline in which I wasn't too involved in that process. We had kind of some communication channels where projects could interact directly with the animation team, and we're building out 30 dApps, like videos to educate on 30 dApps. Now moving to Cosmos, um, as far as myself, like I've got a fair few responsibilities in terms of I'm not just across a lot of Loop, but I'm building other projects as well, and leading other projects outside of just Loop Learn. So now with the team on that side's kind of growing as well, bringing on some more like consistencies around building up socials and trying to get a lot of the Cosmos community involved in that process as well. So it's not just one team or just Loop helping to build these videos, but having some of the educators in Cosmos that are already have kind of already been building content and kind of finding a middle ground where they still follow the flow and the consistency of Loop Learn in terms of educating, but that's a little bit outsourced as well. So it's not just me creating educational content. And then if it, like that, the goal is to then have the different ecosystems within Cosmos as well and dApps, interacting again with the animators to build their own content. So it's not just kind of like just one person, and it can actually scale a little bit more.
So inviting other people to kind of contribute in a way, as long as it's kind of consistent to the main theme and the style of the content that you have.
Yeah, that's the idea, and we've got a couple pieces like different language communities as well, because a big part for us is South America, Latin America. So we've got kind of an outreach arm for Latin America, and building a few kind of really cool products there to kind of create adoption in Latin America around like savings and payment applications. But we also like got communities that are like happy to come in and help translate to multiple languages. So that's been pretty cool.
Have you been harnessing the community much, Bill, in terms of expanding the scale of your content?
Oh, definitely. I mean, our scalability, I think, is one of the big difficulties, right? With this, as we're looking to get so many people. So we have a couple of programs that help bring the community in. One is the 1,000 contributors program. So we actually will give out KSM for those people that are willing to do things like write tutorials or update the wiki, etc. We also have a lot of people in the community that are developing their own like their own newsletters, their own videos, their own podcasts, etc., some of which are supported by the Polkadot Treasury. And what I always see, like my job as is eventually, right, this information should go to people. That doesn't always mean it comes directly from me. Like I know, so I often will post things that are like relatively technical. I will talk with other contributors, and we'll talk at perhaps a more technical or detailed level, and then they will translate that, for lack of a better word, to some form that's perhaps more understandable for a broader audience. So we are always interested in people like helping develop things, and we do provide, like I said, KSM rewards for helping to contribute to a lot of our and Dot, right? So KSM and Dot. Sorry, I'm more of a Kusama person than a Polkadot person personally.
Now we know where your favorites are, Bill.
Yeah, I know. And now these spaces are recorded, so now everyone knows. I should have been more careful with what I talk about. Kusama is Polkadot's canary network. For those of you who don't know, where we put things before it's audited, essentially. Anyways, yeah. So we really work with the community. We talk with the community a lot. We try to encourage them to develop their own materials based on what we provide. Checking their materials and rewarding them for producing it.
Yeah, for us
Yeah.
at SubQuery, right, we've got the exact same challenge, right? We built a tool that's used by hundreds of developers out there across different ecosystems, and we've been building that documentation for a long time. But like the tool's only good as the documentation is only as good as the documentation. And I was talking to another team in the ecosystem last week about the challenges of documenting. Right, it's just a constant uphill battle. It's a constant effort to make sure it's never out of date, to always just tweak things there. And it's kind of thankless, right? No one thanks you when your documentation's excellent. They kind of just complain when it's not. So for us, it's been a good challenge over the years, but one that we've recognized as critical, both from the variety of the content, the different formats that the content comes in, but also the translations, the accessibility of the content by the people around the world.
Yeah, keeping documentation up to date really is a thankless task, and especially, I mean, I know with something like Polkadot, I'm sure with SubQuery's tools as well. Whenever changes occur, you need to very quickly update all the documentation. If there are translations, let people know that are in charge of the translations to update them. Anytime you add things, there's always a chance you make another mistake. So yeah, it's but like you said, it's key, right? If you have outdated documentation, or even worse, no documentation at all, then no one's going to use the tool, right? So yeah, it's a real challenge that's we are working on. That I think that's just part of the game.
I'm going to open up the table to Deebs, who's requested to speak, and maybe he's got a good question for us. Hey, Deebs, can you speak?
Hey, sorry, yeah, I can. It just cut out for a second while I was giving me the mic, but yeah, thanks for hosting this space. I just had a comment or two and just kind of a question going back to when you were originally talking about like mass adoption here. So take this for what you will, because obviously small sample size, but when I first started making content, I started with videos, I guess, targeting a little bit more of the broader audience of like friends and family, introduce them to the crypto space, explain what different concepts were, like basic things between like stable coins and the rest of your crypto, and then it talks about risks and things like that. And the immediate feedback I got from that community, I did a couple polls, was like, we want to know more about risks. We want to know more about safety. And it's something that I've kind of seen as a common theme, at least amongst people who are, what people call normies, so not really in the space. And just kind of how I look at it, like I have to agree, because even someone who's seasoned in crypto, like myself, there's so many ways that you can make mistakes, like y'all were talking about. You're transferring funds from one place to another, you forget to input a memo, or you type in the address wrong, and the only thing linking you also to your funds is your private key or your seed phrase. And so I'm just curious what y'all's thoughts are, because really what I see as the big issue to mass adoption is safety. Because I can't realistically say to most people, hey, if you park your money even in this stable coin, as we've seen, the recent crash of Terra, and even people have concerns about USDC, USDT. It's hard to speak with confidence that people can park their money somewhere in crypto and feel safe and confident in it. So I'm just curious what y'all's thoughts are. Like, is it inviting more government regulation to bring things like, like FDIC insurance that you have on TradeFi? Is it improving customer support at the protocol level? I just kind of throwing this out there.
Go ahead, Simon.
I think it will be like I think a mixture of all of those things. I think time is going to be a big kind of element to this. Like as much as crypto has grown, I don't think people realize still how early we are with everything, right? And I think as far as maybe the UX of adding a memo in and getting an address wrong, that stuff I think may change as the UX kind of develops. I kind of think of it's still in my head, like even on Terra, like Alice Finance, where you didn't even interact kind of with wallet addresses. You had a contact list, and you sent money to a username rather than an address. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of like developments coming with this. And um, besides from that, I think you're 100% right around stable coins and risk. And I think we've still got a long way to go. And byproduct like Terra has been a massive example of that. Like building on Terra and Anchor Protocol, and Anchor Protocol was a normie onboarding machine, right? And it all collapsed. So I think that's a very important point and a very important piece, which is not just educating on the risk, but it's also going to be like really minimizing those risks as much as possible. There's always risk, when there's yield and there's financial products, there's always risk, but it's, I think, minimizing that as much as possible.
I kind of have a follow-up question on that, and I really appreciate the input though. So do you think the minimization of risk through insurance, whatever it is, maybe some protocols will enforce more of a KYC, but do you think that's on the projects themselves, or do you view like inviting government regulation in, right? Because obviously there's a lot more in TradeFi, and I agree with the ideas of decentralization. Like I do, I'm not trying to target that and destroy that, but there's obviously benefits to some centralization, and one of them is safety.
Yeah, look, I do think I'm not completely against all government regulation. I think that if it's done right, I think it can help definitely in certain areas. But I do think it again has to be done right and not from the wrong place, and it has to not stifle innovation. Um, I do think we're going to get more government regulation, but yeah, it's hard to tell honestly. Like it's something that I still probably need to dig into more, and it's going to develop over time anyway.
Yeah. Last question here. I know I've kind of dominating these questions here, but is any of the the education space that you guys were talking about, is any of this geared towards, I mean, for lack of a better term, like congressmen, government? Because these are the people that I think that if they do come into the space and bring regulation, need to be educated. I just don't see much of that, so I'm curious.
Bill, you've been talking to these types of people, right?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly have in a lot of different places, and I'm honestly not sure what I can and can't say, so I'm not going to say any specifics. But I do know that not just us, but other teams are talking to decision makers in a lot of different countries. I don't know how much of that is, as I said, not just public, but also publicized, and how much they want it to be publicized. But definitely, it's not that governments all over the world are against this, right? Against blockchain technology, and even within it, right? People are people. So you have some people that are very much in favor, and some people that are very much against. So again, I think going with what Simon said, it's not that regulation itself it's bad, but bad regulation can be bad. But I can say that Web3 Foundation is certainly doing what we can to ensure that any regulation that is passed will hopefully be a good regulation.
Yeah, from our point of view, our team's mostly based in New Zealand, and our government here, and I know this is probably the same in Simon of Australia, has recently put a lot of effort actually into looking into crypto and blockchain, from the perspective obviously of some of these negative thoughts around environmental impact, monetary policy destabilization. But I think it's been interesting to see a real interest into the space. They're seeing a lot of activity, and a lot of governments are kind of saying, well, there's some really smart people working in the space. It's not all doom and gloom. And the real main thing for us in the ecosystem is actually kind of take the time to talk to them and explain to them. One thing that we haven't done well as an industry, in my view, is actually explain to people what blockchain is, what the outcomes that we aim to achieve are, how we're going about that, and really in layman's terms, and really spend the time to put your arms down and pull someone up to where you kind of are from where we kind of know. And by doing that, it always results in a better outcome, especially with government types. We've seen a lot of good progress here in New Zealand. We're way overdue, guys, or over the end of our time. But I got one more question to you both. You two are the experts in education. I'm sure you do this every second day, but in like a short elevator pitch, 30 seconds or less, you've got my ear in the elevator. What the hell is blockchain, and why should I care? Like, how can you explain it to a complete layman? What is blockchain, and why should I care?
So my quick my 30-second is, blockchain allows you to understand the rules that you're operating in. So if you want to interact with somebody, you can determine ahead of time exactly how that interaction will go. It allows people to ensure that the people they're operating with are following certain rules. Maybe that's a little too technical, but that's how I think of it.
I always use the analogy that currently the system that you use, like you put money in the bank and you trust that your bank is doing the right thing with your money. You either trust the bank is doing the right thing with your money, or that there is enough government regulation there to make sure that they're doing the right thing with your money, right? Same with potentially the legal system, for example, right? We trust that the legal system is potentially doing the right thing and it's doing its intended job. But if you're in a third world country, right, you may not be able to rely upon that legal system. You may not be able to rely on that insurance. You might not be able to rely on that bank. So the way, and I kind of take the DeFi route around, blockchain and cryptocurrency, but I usually use that as an example where blockchain removes that need to trust that bank is doing the right thing. And because that, the bank, how do you know that they're not sending double the money to somebody else, right? Well, there's safeguards, there's government regulations, all this stuff stopping that. But with blockchain, you actually really minimize that need for trust, where you can have a system that runs without, needing to trust your bank, or needing to trust your insurance provider, your lawyer, all this sort of stuff, and enables to kind of create a base layer where stuff can then be built on top of it without having to worry about that. I know that's a really short kind of like maybe answer, and there's probably I could put a flesh that out a bit more, but yeah, that's kind of the train that I go down.
Awesome. No, thanks, guys. And for everyone listening, next time that your cousin or your sister-in-law asks you what the hell blockchain is and why you're in it, now you have a great answer to send their way.
I just send them to my video series. I just send them to the videos.
Everyone, thank you very much for joining this SubQuery Sessions episode. Please follow Bill and Simon. They've both got some excellent insights, and I'm sure you'll see more of those on each of their Twitter profiles. But Bill, Simon, thank you very much for giving the time out of your busy days to come talk. It was an absolute pleasure hosting and also hearing what you had to say about this.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thanks for hosting.
Cheers, guys. Enjoy.
Cheers.